It's 8 o'clock. This is the UK Tonight. Coming up, too little, too late. The damning report into the government's handling of the pandemic. The COVID inquiry finding 23,000 lives could have been saved if a lockdown had been introduced just 1 week earlier, with all four governments of the UK criticised for failing to grasp the scale of the issue. The inquiry also said Boris Johnson presided over a toxic culture in Number 10, while cabinet members and key scientists failed to act with urgency to tackle the virus. Coming up, we'll hear from the founder of the COVID-19 Bereaved Families for Justice group to get their reaction to these findings. Also ahead, the Home Secretary proposes the biggest overhaul of the legal migration system in half a century. Shabana Mahmood tells MPs the government would like to double the minimum period for granting indefinite leave to remain from 5 to 10 years. We'll get reaction from Westminster. Plus, tributes tonight to legendary Stone Roses bass guitarist Gary Manny Manfield, who has died at the age of 63. And weather warnings in force as parts of the country face heavy snowfall and sub-zero temperatures, with power cuts and schools closed. We'll have the latest for you. Well, that's come and much more on the UK Tonight. Well, we begin tonight with that damning assessment of the government's handling of the pandemic. A scathing report from the COVID inquiry has found that 23,000 lives could have been saved had lockdown been introduced a week earlier, while all four of the UK governments were accused of acting too slow to contain the virus. The chair of the inquiry, Baroness Hallett, also said that Boris Johnson led a toxic and chaotic culture in Number 10, while his top advisor, Dominic Cummings, was said to have poisoned the atmosphere in Downing Street. Coming up, I'll hear from some of the families of those who lost their lives in the pandemic to get their reaction to these findings. But first, our health correspondent, Ashish Joshi, has this report.
You must stay at home.
Communities will become immune to it.
A protective ring around our care homes.
An eat out to help out discount.
A government battling an unprecedented health crisis. But it acted too slowly and it failed to understand the danger posed.
I can summarise my findings of the response as too little, too late. All four governments failed to appreciate the scale of the threat or the urgency of response it demanded in the early part of 2020.
I was at a hospital the other night where I think there were actually a few coronavirus patients, and I shook hands with everybody.
The report says 23,000 lives in England alone could have been saved if the first lockdown had been imposed a week before it actually was, and that the Department of Health and Social Care misled the public by giving the impression that the UK was well prepared for a pandemic. For bereaved families, Baroness Hallett's findings are bittersweet. They feel absolved but pained by the failure of government. Naomi's mother, Christina, died alone in hospital in January 2021, and this is the last photo of her taken at Christmas.
I feel vindicated that she has set out the absolute failure of leadership at the very top of government. I hold Boris Johnson responsible for my mother's death in January 2021, and she sets out really clearly the terrible mistakes, the delays, the ignoring of scientific advice.
It was a mix of a lot of the wrong people in the wrong job, decades of accumulated power, no real scrutiny and insight.
The report singles out the then Prime Minister Boris Johnson and his key advisor at the time, Dominic Cummings, for creating a toxic and chaotic culture at the heart of government. And the government's Eat Out to Help Out scheme has been criticised for its role in the second wave of the virus. And Baroness Hallett found there was no lockdown exit strategy and no planning for a second wave. Giving evidence to the inquiry in 2023, former Prime Minister Boris Johnson said he was sorry for the pain and loss of COVID victims. Boris Johnson's chief advisor, Dominic Cummings, has led criticism of the inquiry, calling it a mix of cover-ups and rewriting history. But this scathing report will provide bereaved families some of the answers and culpability they've long asked for. While it will bring them no comfort, it may even cause them more distress, it will bring them closer to understanding why the UK's response to this unprecedented health crisis was so poor. Baroness Hallett has made 19 key recommendations, including clearer public health messaging and a greater scrutiny of emergency powers. Too late for the almost 227,000 people who died in the UK with COVID-19 on their death certificates, but making sure more lives can be saved when the next pandemic strikes. Ashish Joshi, Sky News in Westminster.
The report from the inquiry chair is a damning verdict of the decisions taken at the heart of government. Our Deputy Political Editor Sam Coates has been digging into some of these findings.
And here it is, the COVID inquiry report into the politics of the pandemic, 800 pages. The entire inquiry comes at a cost of £200 million. Now, the moment this dropped today, it turned out that Keir Starmer said he'd already put in train some changes, didn't wait to see what was in it. But lots of people will be studying what's in this very closely. Let's take you through some key bits. Now, the central charge is that government was too slow to lock down, and that cost lives. Mandatory lockdown should have been imposed 1 week earlier, says the report. Deaths in England in the first wave up until the 1st of July 2020 would then have been reduced by 48%, which it says equates to approximately 23,000 fewer deaths. That's an eye-catching headline figure for this report. So what went wrong? Well, this report identifies two things. It identifies the people and some of the structures in Whitehall. The Prime Minister of the day, of course, being Boris Johnson. And it says Boris Johnson's own failure to appreciate the urgency of the situation was due to his optimism that it would amount to nothing. I think some themes that long-time students of Boris Johnson will be familiar with. And they said it was compounded by misleading assurances that he received from the Cabinet Office and the Department for Health and Social Care that the pandemic planning was robust. So how did this happen? How did government departments get their information and their communication so wrong? Well, a lot of this is about politicians who have left the front line. But this figure, Chris Wormald, is the top civil servant in Keir Starmer's government. And he was at the heart of the pandemic because he ran the health department at the time of the pandemic. So criticism of him matters. And it says it was Christopher Wormald's responsibility to rectify the over-enthusiastic impression that Matt Hancock, Health Secretary of the day, had given to 10 Downing Street. The inquiry has seen no evidence that Chris Wormald took such action. So the Health Secretary was saying it's going to be fine. That wasn't true. Why doesn't the guy now running the civil service step in? That's the question raised by the report. And they go on to say a bit more. Matt Hancock's unjustified assurance to 10 Downing Street and the Cabinet Office that the Health Department was managing the crisis effectively, and Sir Christopher Wormald's failure to rectify these assurances obscured the reality and the need for more actions. The implication there is that the guy at the head of the civil servants right now should have acted earlier, could have potentially saved lives. Will Downing Street act on this? Will he continue to be the top mandarin? I suspect Keir Starmer's going to try and duck any action on him, but we will see in the coming days. But of course, they are not the only people who are still in government. A couple of other names that will be familiar to you. Chris Whitty and Professor Patrick Vallance, the two scientists who were the face of the pandemic. But there's some criticism directed at them. And it matters because Patrick Vallance, now Lord Vallance, is a minister in this Labour government. And the report says that they concluded and advised that the public would not maintain compliance with restrictions over a long period. In other words, initially they weren't advising for a lockdown. This concept of behavioural fatigue had no grounding in behavioural science and proved damaging, given the imperative to act more decisively and sooner. In other words, the recommendation of the scientists wasn't based on the science. And again, the government didn't lock down. Will that mean any consequences for Professor Vallance? We will see. So far, no word from Number 10. But the question with these expensive reports that go into many, many chapters and volumes is, will they make ultimately a big difference? Now, quite a lot of the recommendations that I've gone through suggest that the inquiry chair just thinks that things should be done better and quicker. Look at this recommendations. Leaders must work constructively within their own governments and across the four nations. Political differences should not be a consideration at a time of national emergency. That's a recommendation. In other words, just do things better, do things smarter, and don't argue. I mean, which politician wouldn't agree with that? But in the heat of a pandemic, is it realistic to imagine that a recommendation like this will make any difference at all? That's what we will find out in future.
Let's bring in our health correspondent, Ashish Joshi, who joins me now from Westminster. And Ashish, it has to be said there was a healthy degree of scepticism ahead of the publication of this report, critics saying that this was a costly waste of time. What has been the reaction to this report, scathing as it is in its nature?
The reaction has been one of vindication. If you speak to the bereaved families who've been campaigning tirelessly for so long to have their voices heard, they will say today that they have moved one step closer towards understanding why this government reacted so slowly and so badly. The decision-making at the heart of government was chaotic. And they have maintained for a long time that many lives, including the loved ones they've lost, could have been saved. And they were vindicated today. They felt listened to because Baroness Hallett said exactly that. It's true that approaching the publication of this report, Sarah-Jane, there were many critics who said inquiries like this cost a lot of money and they achieve very little. So I don't think anyone was expecting such a hard-hitting report from Baroness Hallett. This is scathing and this is damning. All right, so the families haven't got the names. They haven't had fingers pointed at the people who were ultimately responsible. But what they do have is a sense of collective failure. When we talk about the Department of Health sending out messages to the rest of the country that it was completely in control of the pandemic, that proved not to be true. And we know who was running the Department of Health and Social Care at the time. When we look at Dominic Cummings and we look at Boris Johnson and the roles they played during this crisis. And ultimately, Baroness Hallett said that ministers and officials who broke lockdown rules, they undermined public confidence. So this is a report which really looks at the minutiae of what was happening in those months and those years through the pandemic. And the government does not come out of this well at all. Even at the end of it, we're talking about the 23,000 lives at the beginning of the pandemic, but even at the end of the pandemic, Baroness Hallett says that the government was literally busking it. It was gambling and taking risks with the vaccine rollout program. Had that vaccine not been so effective, had the Omicron variant not been as mild, had it been deadlier as were previous variants, then she said the impact would have been disastrous. Imagine that, disastrous. 23,000, it would have been tens of thousands of more. So this is failure of government from the start to the end of the pandemic.
Ashish, thank you. Ashish Joshi there. We're joining us now, Matt Fowler, co-founder of COVID-19 Bereaved Families for Justice. His father, Ian, died in April 2020. And Matt, thank you so much for joining us tonight on what is a hugely important day for your family and thousands of other families. Your reaction, first of all, to this report?
Thank you for having me. My initial reaction is one of, I guess, validation more than anything else. The bereaved have been campaigning for this inquiry for the last 5 years. Almost immediately after losing Dad, Joe and I started this. And we've come a long way, and it's been a lot of work. It's nice to be described as tirelessly campaigning. The truth is that it's incredibly tiring, but we've dedicated ourselves to it. And so it's really good today to hear that the things that we've been saying for the last 5 years have been given some validation by the chat.
Are you a step closer to understanding essentially what went wrong?
I think from our point of view, we always suspected about what exactly went wrong. Looking at the language that was being used around the time and the length of time it was taking for any actions to come out, we kind of had an idea about what might have caused that. But to have it kind of put in black and white has made a big difference. And I think that it's a step closer to making sure that the issues that we have seen will be actioned properly. And hopefully we shall learn some lessons from what did go wrong and prevent them from happening in the future.
Matt, I want to ask you about one particular part of the report that talked about the lockdown that was brought in 2020, it said, had that lockdown been brought in a week earlier, and the date given on the 16th of March, if it had been brought in on the 16th of March, a week earlier than it had been, 23,000 fewer deaths in England would have happened. Just looking at when your father died, what was it like to read that as part of this report?
So it's really interesting for a number of reasons. I mean, firstly, we talk about those 23,000 lives. That's over a short period of time. And if you take into account the exponential growth of the virus spreading, it's actually ultimately by the end of the sort of third wave, and as things start to die off, it's actually a much higher number. Yes, it is very important to me. It's a crucial part of my history now. The necessity to lock down had been agreed a lot earlier than that, but it was the Prime Minister's personal decision to delay lockdown by 9 days, from the 14th to the 23rd. And it is that time period where my dad caught COVID and eventually died. It's so important to take into account how much impact a quicker response has. I've often said that people like me who've lost somebody, it's often not just a case of them losing someone who's important to them, like my dad was my hero, who's incredibly important to me. But to some people, that's their whole world. And if we could have done anything to have protected people earlier, you could have saved a lot more than just the people that died.
I know for so many of the families of those who died during the pandemic, accountability has been a key word. It so often is for families like yours that are campaigning for some sort of justice, whatever that may look like to those individual families. That's outside the remit of this inquiry. No names given, no fingers pointed, no personal responsibility taken by any figure, but a number of names are mentioned in that report. As it's beyond the remit of this inquiry, what does accountability look like to you in terms of those key figures that were involved in this pandemic and the mishandling of it?
So there's a lot to be said about what justice looks like. And to me, the most important thing is preventing people going through what I did. I've been saying from the very start, from when we first started campaigning back in April 2020, that there is nothing that I can do to bring my dad back. He's gone. But the important thing is making sure that other people don't go through my experience. That's it. And there are people that are responsible for the vast number of mistakes that have brought us to this point. And they have rightly been named in some cases. As I've already mentioned, the ex-Prime Minister, Johnson, is one of those, but he's not the only one named. Although I don't feel that we'll get proper accountability for some of those mistakes, I think it's important that both the previous government and current government and all future governments take into account what the actual scale of failure is when we mishandle a crisis like this. And we make sure that with that consequence in mind, we do what we can to stop it happening again. I feel like that is, firstly, the most honest form of justice. And I think it's the one that benefits society the most, to make sure.
You would like to see the recommendations implemented in full, because there have been a number of recommendations put forward by Baroness Hallett. I mean, you know, fundamental from this, everyone was affected by this. You know, so many people lost loved ones, and the lack of a plan for this kind of pandemic is possibly, you know, one of the most jaw-dropping aspects of it all, and the sort of requirement for there to be a plan should this happen again, the most basic of requirements. But presumably you've been through these recommendations today and you'd like them implemented in full.
Yeah, we also have a list of our own recommendations that go sort of beyond the ones that the chair has put forward, much the same way that we did for Module 1. And thankfully, the Module 1 recommendations are being adopted by the current government. So I'm hoping that if we can continue to engage with them, they will similarly adopt more of our recommendations on top of what the chair has suggested. I feel that there is a big opportunity to learn from a lot of mistakes that will ultimately benefit not just people now, not just people in 5 years, but could make changes to the law for hundreds of years to come and save an unknown number of people.
Well, listen, Matt, I really appreciate you coming on tonight. I know you talk about this a lot as part of your, as you quite rightly put it, tirelessly campaigning, but I would imagine it never gets any easier talking about your dad and what happened to your family. So I really appreciate you coming on and reacting to this report out today from the COVID inquiry. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
No, I appreciate it. Matt Flower, thank you. Now, the Home Secretary today announced plans for the biggest overhaul of the legal migration system for 50 years. Shabana Mahmood proposing doubling the minimum period for granting indefinite leave to remain from 5 to 10 years. Now, that change would mean 1.6 million people who are expecting to achieve the status between 2026 and 2030 would no longer be eligible. Let's bring in our chief political correspondent, John Craig, for reaction to this move. John?
Well, it's got a better reception from Labour backbenchers than she did earlier in the week with her announcements about asylum seekers. So this is part 2 of the big immigration crackdown. Monday it was illegal migration. Today it's legal migration. And yes, a lot of those periods where you have to wait for to become a British citizen and stay in the UK are being increased, some of them up to 20 years. Now, this is all part of a plan to ease tension, she said. She talked at one stage, she said, she expressed fears that Greater Britain was in danger of giving way to littler England. Okay, so that's a charge against the Labour's political opponents, Little Englanders. She said that current divisions could lead to danger for migrants and their families, including hers. She talked about her own background quite a bit, as she did in her statement on Monday. And she said, some would choose to scorn this analysis. Those who look like me don't have that luxury. Our lives, those of our families, are more dangerous in a country that turns inwards. She began by saying migration will always be a vital part of Britain's story, but the scale of arrivals in recent years has been unprecedented. And she mentioned the so-called Boris wave and blamed the Tory migration policies of Boris Johnson post-Brexit. She said to settle in this country forever is not a right, but a privilege. It must be earned. She said she was replacing a broken immigration system with one that prioritises contribution, integration and respect for the British sense of fair play. Well, after that statement in the Commons, we spoke here on Sky News to Mike Tapp. He's the Immigration Minister. This is what he had to say a little earlier this evening.
Having a system that functions, ensuring that our public services are running, ensuring that we're attracting the right people. It's about contribution and integration. And the reason for that, by the way, is because it's being used by some on the right particularly to cause division in our communities. And it's easy for them to do that because there's been that lack of integration and contribution from some.
Well, some of the rules include, for example, people who are applying for indefinite leave to remain must have no criminal record, speak English to A-level standards and have no debt. Those who can speak English to a degree level standard could qualify for a 9-year path to a settlement. Those paying the higher rate of tax could qualify at 5 years. Those on the top rate could qualify after 3. So there's all sorts of different scales being proposed. She talked about a consultation process now. That's going to go on until February, but almost certainly this will require a big piece of legislation on top of legislation on illegal migration as well.
John, thank you. John Craig with the latest there from Westminster. Still to come on the UK tonight, tributes to Stone Roses bassist Manny after his death at the age of 63. Also coming up, why more than half of UK novelists are concerned about losing their jobs. And we'll be talking to Sky Sports News presenter Jo Wilson about her new documentary about her experiences with cancer.
we are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club. 4 more years! Free wherever you get your news. I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
Tributes have been paid to Stone Roses bassist Gary "Manny" Mounfield after his death at the age of 63. Manny was part of the Stone Roses between 1987 and 1996 when they split up, before also performing as part of Primal Scream until the Roses reformed in 2011. He helped create some of their best-known songs, such as I Am the Resurrection, Elephant Stone and Fool's Gold. Well, many tributes being posted on social media this evening to Manny. Liam Gallagher saying this: in total shock and absolutely devastated on hearing the news about Manny, my hero, R.I.P. our kid. Tim Burgess of The Charlatans posted, I shared this photo a week or so ago on Manny's birthday. It never failed to bring a smile to my face, and that was exactly the same for the man himself. One of the absolute best in every way, such a beautiful friend. Love you, Manny. Never to be forgotten. And Sean Ryder of the Happy Monday said, R.I.P. Manny, my heartfelt condolences to his twin boys and all of his family. Novelists are the latest professionals to voice their fears over the rise of artificial intelligence, with around half of the UK's published writers saying they worry their job will be completely wiped out by AI. Well, joining me now to discuss the issue, children's author Annabel Steadman. Annabel, good of you to come on the show this evening to talk about this. More than half the UK's novelists believes AI will replace their work. Are you worried?
I think I am worried about it. I think there's definitely a big danger in these books potentially flooding the market and kind of meaning that our books are less kind of available, particularly if they're cheaper or easier to access. But I do think that what we do is impossible to replicate. You know, I don't think they're good replacements necessarily for what we do as authors.
Yeah. Annabel, apparently romance novelists most exposed to risk, as well as thriller and crime writers, presumably because there's some kind of formula, perhaps, to that kind of storytelling. But from what you're saying, these kind of novels are already out there, already in the marketplace. To what extent?
I think that they are starting to come in, and it's getting harder to identify them. But I do think that the best novels you read, and the best romances, the best crime and thrillers, they're the ones that surprise you. They do something that you weren't expecting, and that this idea that something can be generated by lots of different ideas and be kind of generic and still enjoyable in that way. It feels very alien to me as a writer, and I think lots of readers will be put off by that as well. And in a context where adults and children aren't reading for pleasure, the numbers are going down, then I think it's really worrying that we're maybe putting these books out that are not actually that enjoyable to read.
Yeah. I often hear people say, oh, it's just a mindless read, and I think you're missing the whole point of reading. And I suppose if there are AI-generated books following a formula, because essentially, from what I understand, they take novels to train these AI programs to write books. I mean, your Skandar series, hugely successful, Sunday Times and New York Times bestselling and award-winning in the children's market. Do you know if your work has been used to feed and train these machines?
Yeah, all my books have been fed in, all 6 of them, and also in translation. So, and I wasn't paid for that. Nobody asked me if that was okay. But I think it's interesting that when the books came out, they're about bloodthirsty unicorns, and I was thinking about whether or not an AI would have come up with that. You know, the concept of it is often what has attracted children. It's quite unusual, and I'm not sure that it would have done, and that's a real shame because children have really enjoyed reading them.
Yeah, we don't need children to start talking to AI because, as you said, some of the best ideas come from the minds of children. Sometimes I talk to my daughter and think, where has that come from? I would never have come up with that. But in terms of that's really interesting, your book's being taken without your permission. I mean, where do you stand on copyright? Because presumably you and your publishers have looked into this, and it seems like copyright protections for authors haven't kept pace with technological advances. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's true, and I think everyone is kind of scrambling to try to get those protections in place. And you know, we have licenses for other things. You know, I've licensed my work for various things. There's going to be a film of my books, and so that, you know, they've bought the rights to that. But this space seems to be very unregulated at the moment, and it's really difficult to control it.
Yeah, and presumably easy to spot at the moment, but the more it carries on, could it be harder to spot?
Possibly. I mean, some of the things that I have in my books, though, I feel like you can feel if a human has written something. And I think, you know, children, for example, they're so discerning. They get bored so easily. And I think that, you know, part of being a children's author is making sure you keep their attention. And I'm not sure whether kind of a mix of all different kinds of books is going to really do it for them, because they're looking for that new, exciting thing.
Listen, really interesting to get your take on this story, Annabelle. That's Annabelle Steadman there, British children's author of the award-winning Skandar series. Really good to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
As still to come on the programme, I'll be joined in the studio by Sky Sports News presenter Jo Wilson to discuss her new documentary, taking a look at her cancer diagnosis. Now, back in 2022, Sky Sports News presenter Jo Wilson was diagnosed with stage 3 cervical cancer shortly after giving birth to her daughter. Fast forward 3 years and she is now cancer-free. And it's her hope that a new documentary about her cancer journey will offer comfort to others going through the same experience. Here's a clip from that documentary with Jo speaking to former Sunderland and Birmingham City boss Tony Mowbray about his own experience.
The doctors tell you all these things, that there's no guarantee that you are coming out of this. And so you sit there kissing your wife, I'll be fine, kissing your children. Really, half of a little percentage in the back of your mind thinks the doc said that I might not wake up from this. But I did wake up. I woke up 4.5 stone lighter. They'd removed the tumour. I remember looking at a mirror across from the door and thinking, who's that? I was, let's say, 4.5 stone lighter. I was grey. The clothes I was, I'd put a tracksuit bottom on. It was like one of them comedy scenes where somebody pulls their tracksuit out, you know, and there's this much gap, a foot's gap.
Well, Jo is in the studio now alongside Sky Sports presenter Mark McAdam, who basically pulled this documentary together alongside Jo. This is a big project for both of you, and it's live now on YouTube. And first of all, congratulations, Jo, because we've spoken before privately and on this programme about your cancer journey and your story, and I know just how difficult it is, but you wanted to put that sort of difficulty and everything you'd been through to good use. That's essentially how this started, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I've always said if one good thing can come from something awful that I went through, I think speaking about cancer, keeping those conversations going is just really important for raising awareness so that people get checked. And also, when I was going through my cancer diagnosis treatment, I found a lot of the things out there were quite scary and quite negative. I mean, cancer is a scary thing, and the reality of cancer is very dark and people die. But I guess I just kind of wanted to share a story of hope that I would have liked to have seen when I was maybe going through it in some of the dark days that I had. And that was kind of what I wanted to achieve with this.
And Mark, you sort of came into it because in your patch there was a footballer called David Brooks. There is a footballer called David Brooks, a Premier League footballer who had had his own cancer diagnosis, and that's how that started, that conversation between you two, Jo wanting to be put in touch with him to perhaps do an interview and see where it would go.
Yeah, so Jo came to me and said, David Brooks, who's been through this cancer, Hodgkin lymphoma, he's a great player and he's been through this really traumatic thing. And
young as well.
Yes, 24 years old.
Yeah.
And I'd love to speak to him. Have you done an interview with him? Have you spoke to him about it? And I said, funny enough, Jo, we've actually got something lined up for a few weeks' time. But it doesn't make sense for me to do it. You're the one that should be asking the questions. You understand this, you've been through it, and it's going to be far more authentic for you to be sat across the table speaking to David than it would be for me. And that was really kind of the start of the project. And we said, well, let's do this, but maybe this is something bigger than just one interview. Maybe there's something far greater that we can do. And that's kind of where the journey started. Yeah,
because, Jo, there is a point in the documentary where, you know, you're talking to people and, you know, taking yourself back to breaking the news of their cancer diagnosis on air. And then, of course, you have your own. And it is when people in the public eye have a cancer diagnosis that a conversation starts. But the aim of this documentary is to keep the conversation going, and not just in a way, what I really liked about this documentary was not in a way of make sure you get yourself checked. I mean, that is all very important, and, you know, that message should be loud and clear every time. But just talking about cancer normally, you know, in all its ugly phases, in its dark humour, cancer should be part of the conversation because, you know, as you said in the documentary, 1 in 2 of us will get it. This needs to be an ongoing dialogue, not a one-off.
And I think the reality of cancer, I mean, it's so different for everyone, but there are so many shared experiences, and there was a few moments in the documentary that even I was a bit like, should we keep that in? because I'm not sure that we were talking, it was Henry and I were talking about this really dark sense of humour that we developed.
This is Henry Lansbury,
Henry Lansbury, yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I was talking about how I used to joke about dying, and I really connected with people that had this really dark sense of humour, and he felt exactly the same way. And I was a bit worried about, because I thought, oh, are people going to judge me and think that that's an inappropriate way to handle things? But Mark, again, he was like, but that's how you handled it.
Yeah.
And actually, even this morning, getting some messages from people saying that that was one of the things that really resonated with them. And I think that's it. Just, we're all very normal people, whether you're a footballer, whether you're a sports journalist, whatever walk of life. We're normal people that have gone through something. And I just hope by having those normal conversations, putting it out there, people can resonate with it.
Yeah, I mean, the documentary is on YouTube now for those who want to go and watch it, and I highly recommend you do, because it's very entertaining as well. As you said, it's just like, it's chatting to normal people. Yes, OK, they're in the sports world, so to a lot of people, they'll be heroes and they'll admire them, but it is a very real conversation. What's the reaction been so far, Mark? Because it's going to be on again this weekend.
It's been phenomenal. And just seeing the messages of support that Joe's had and the messages that have come to me about the documentary. And that's when you really start to realise that cancer does impact so many people, even people in our own office that have messaged. And I didn't know they had a relative or a mum and dad or someone that they were connected to was going through some form of cancer or had been through it as well. So I think that's the one thing that's really hit us. But I think the outpouring of love for Jo has been incredible. And her ability to be so raw and honest on camera, which is really, really difficult, has connected with so many people that have watched the programme. And that was one of the aims, I guess, really, was to just get into people's living rooms and talk about these things and not make cancer an embarrassing conversation or a worrying conversation or a topic to avoid. And I think that was one of the things that Jo did so well throughout the course of the documentary. And she just had this ability to get everyone to open up and be so relaxed and talk about their darkest moments. And I think that's one of the things, and you've seen that since the first airing of the show, that it's really touched people and they've all learnt something and enjoyed, in a weird way, that the moments that Jo's created.
Well, there is a moment in there, Jo, where, you know, you and Henry Lansbury do have a bit of a joke about it, you know, saying, who'd have thought, as a, you know, sitting down opposite a footballer in your profession as a sports presenter, we're talking about your testicles and my cervix, which, you know, I must admit, even stopped me in my tracks. And I thought, oh, gosh, yeah, you're quite right. But, you know, so much of cancer is embarrassing, whether it's bowel cancer, so you almost, you know, you're embarrassed because you're talking about parts of your body that you wouldn't ordinarily talk to colleagues and people watching at home.
And I think Tony Mowbray as well, seeing a man, you know, in his late 50s, early 60s, talking
such
about...
Such a big, strong, powerful character throughout his career.
Everyone has seen him, exactly, as this tough football manager on the sidelines, and to be so open with me about what he went through. And I hope that resonates with people, you know, people probably, you know, my dad's age, my uncle's age, that are watching it and seeing a man like Tony speaking about something that we don't usually talk about. You know, one of the
As
first
he calls
things...
it his backside.
Exactly, yeah, exactly, though. And, and it's kind of that's the point of it.
And one thing that particularly resonated with me, Jo, and I know a lot of people watching this who will have somebody going through a similar experience at the moment, is your initial reaction to your diagnosis and not wanting to tell people, not wanting to burden people, and not wanting to tell people until you had a plan, because that's the thing with cancer, isn't it? You want to control the controllables, and let's face it, at the beginning of that journey, there aren't many. So for people watching tonight, you know, everybody handles it differently, and I'm sure you don't want to go, this is how you should handle it, but just talk to me about how you dealt with those early, scary days and moments.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is about confiding in the people that you can. It was funny, this theme of guilt kept coming up. Emma Saunders, who's Sky Sports football reporter, she said that's exactly how she felt the whole time. She felt guilt about absolutely everything. She didn't want to put that on her family, her friends. And again, that's something that people have got in touch about to say that's exactly how I felt as well. So, like you say, there is no way to deal with it. You only know when you're going through it. I do think maybe I look back and maybe I should have been more open at the start with people and lend.
Because you want to protect other people and they want to protect you. It's this sort of...
But then you
it's
realise,
so British, I think.
Yeah, it absolutely is. But then you see the support that you get when you do speak out about it, and you kind of think, oh, I could have done with that support actually a little while ago.
But you also did it in the documentary as well, and I think that was one of the things where it hit me the hardest. Going with my friend and colleague, seeing her go for her scans, going into the machine, going to the hospital and almost reliving those dark days. And that's where it became really real for me, and I found that really tough. So I can understand why she wouldn't want to in those moments. But having that ability to relive it for the documentary was also really, really powerful.
Well, listen, the overriding message of this documentary is to talk about cancer. You know, 1 in 2 of us are going to get it. We all know someone affected by it in some shape or form, and we just need to normalise it because, unfortunately, it is part and parcel of everyday life now, so we need to talk about it as such, and this documentary is really important in sort of starting that conversation, hopefully keeping it going. Jo, congratulations. It's a great documentary. It's on YouTube now, and Mark as well. Congratulations in pulling it all together. It's a really important piece of work, so thank you for coming in to talk to us about it.
Thank you for having us.
Really good to see you. Thank you. Right, still to come on the programme, the country bracing itself for another night of plunging temperatures, I'm afraid. Amber warnings issued for ice. We'll have the details for you. And in sport, the first test is almost here. Ben Stokes aiming to become the first England captain to win the Ashes in Australia in over 10 years.
I'm Dominic Waghorn, Sky's International Affairs Editor, covering a world that seems to be unravelling. War, unrest, revolutions.
It's not his country, it's ours.
They have succeeded for the first time in their country's history in removing a leader from power. No freedom! Sky News, the full story first. There was fighting here, but there's clearly now a lull, and they're using it to bring up more ammunition. This is a mass exodus in which Russia is hemorrhaging some of its brightest and its best. According to the local weather channel, there have been more than 2,500 lightning strikes and flash flooding, all on top of this week's lethal tornado. What stays with you most in this job is some of the people you meet. What is your worst fear about what the Russians want to do to the children?
They're just boosting demographics by stealing young people.
Would you like to take the opportunity, Mr. President, on Sky News to invite Barack Obama to come here? Mr. Trump, are you running for president? Can you confirm it?
We're going to take a look, a very serious look.
On that day, we saw your fighters killing women, killing children. Was that a mistake? Did you go too far? You couldn't control your fighters? The full force of the state is being used to crush any protest. Free wherever you get your news. It's half an hour now past the deadline that Hamas issued, and we've now seen a third barrage of rockets coming in. Another alarm. The mood here is jittery and nervous. We're seeing the world get more and more divided, and it's our job to try to make sense of it all.
I'll tell you on another day on the podcast what that was all about.
Welcome to the world.
Come along for the journey, it'll be fun.
Russia knows our weaknesses, but do you? This is the war game.
There were a number of armed security.
We want to discover, to find out what's really going on.
Everything you need to know about British politics in about 20 minutes.
I actually don't like political drama.
So, where next?
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Jess is here with the sport. I just had to confirm in the break, we are talking about the Ashes, aren't we? Of course we are.
What else would we be talking about?
Exactly, we've been talking about it all week. It's not even started yet. Starts tomorrow night, right?
Well, it starts in the early hours of tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
So you might have to stay up late for this one, or go to bed early and get up for 2 a.m.
Talk us through your strategy. Let us know at Sky News on social
how you want to do
media.
it.
But it's happening in Perth, we know that much. Main talking points ahead of this first test. I mean, Ben Stokes, of course.
Ben Stokes, of course. Where to start with this one? Because there's been so much said between the two teams, so much mudslinging. But I think there's a growing feeling within this England camp that this is their best chance to win an Ashes series away from home since 2011. But this is not a transitional Australia side. That's why they believe, England, that they have such a strong opportunity. Australia as well, remember, without their captain, Pat Cummins. He's a massive player for them, a brilliant bowler as well. So for them not to have him for this first test is a massive
massive blow. And I also feel as though without Josh Hazlewood, another one of their best bowlers, this Australia bowling attack is not going to be as good as it has been in recent years. And then we mentioned Ben Stokes on the England side of things. He says he is up to playing 5 tests if he's needed, but we do know that he can be injury prone. He's getting older. I mean, he's not that old, come on, but he is getting older. His body's been through a lot.
Yeah.
Is he as durable as we want him to be across the 5 tests? We'll wait to see.
I think just having him there is enough.
His leadership, his experience, his motivational team talks will be
key.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Another issue that England might want to probably not focus on, but Australia certainly will. Mark Wood has come back into this Ashes team, into this test side. He hasn't played a test in over a year. He's one of England's best bowlers. He brings a lot of pace. He brings a lot of quality. Is he 100%? We're not quite sure yet. He seems to have got over that hamstring injury that he was suffering from, something that we wait to see. The crowd as well. Oh, my gosh, the crowd in Perth is going to be so rowdy and so hostile. How much will that get into England's heads?
You've just got to watch it by whatever means necessary.
First ball after about 2 a.m. In the early hours of the morning. We cannot wait, SJ. It's going to be brilliant. Cricket, all to play for. Let's also, though, give you the rest of the day sport, starting with football.
Staying connected is vital for business. Sky Business sponsors this report.
OK. Are you ready? Yeah.
35 prisoners were released from Barlini prison this morning, but only one left in a limousine.
Duncan spoke about the letters he's had when he was in prison, and that created a bond between Duncan and Everton.
It's not just words. I love them, and I'll always love them.
It's the story which has gripped Merseyside. Walter Smith's future on the line. The Everton boss apparently close to quitting over the multi-million-pound sale of captain Duncan Ferguson to Newcastle.
We were under pressure from the bank to get the overdraft down.
It upset me. You try to move on. It's not easy for me. I couldn't rub off my tattoo, could I?
The fans adore him. Then all of a sudden, a crash bang wallop, he's playing with the striped shirt on.
A fan had came into the training ground, burst into reception, sat herself on a seat and refused to move until Duncan Ferguson was re-signed.
It was a bit of shock. Once your club doesn't want you, really it's inevitable you've got to move, haven't you?
Signing for Rangers, Duncan.
It's brilliant.
It's like for you.
Sky Business sponsors this report.
Now, schools have been shut and some areas of the UK are without power as temperatures continue to plummet. Amber and yellow snow and ice warnings are in place across parts of the country with up to 25 centimetres of snow predicted to fall in affected areas. Our North of England correspondent Shingi Marike has this report.
This was the first glimpse of winter on its way. Parts of Britain blanketed in snow. From hills in the Scottish Highlands to the Yorkshire moors. Across the country, there were a number of weather warnings in place. The snow being enjoyed by some, causing issues for others. With schools closed and roads blocked. Pickering in North Yorkshire was in the amber zone, where some of the worst weather was felt. It took a community effort to keep people moving, with local farmers helping clear the roads. We caught up with one we'd seen earlier in the day. He'd been out for hours.
I got up at 3 and I was out at past and started with a gritter and swapped to a snowplough, just getting some lunch and then I'm going back again. I've been towing cars out this morning. If you need an ambulance or a doctor or anything, you have to get them there.
This is the first real cold snap of the season, and for plenty of people it's simply a chance to have fun. Places like this will look picturesque, but there will also be pockets of the country facing real disruption too.
That disruption will impact people like Lisa, who runs a butcher shop in Pickering.
Everything we get is from North Yorkshire, so you know we're not getting deliveries. It's hard to run a business because people expect you to have the food in.
Lisa's shop is supplied by her family farm. It's just 2 miles from town, but at times they feel cut off and isolated.
My husband is currently trying to get water to the animals because we've had no electric all night.
In the towns and the moors above Pickering, the snow continued to fall throughout the day. For more remote communities like here, that will mean contending with power outages and more potential disruption until the snow begins to fall over the weekend. For plenty of other people, though, today would have been the perfect sign that the seasons are changing. Shingi Marike, Sky News in North Yorkshire.
Well, with that, let's get the latest weather forecast, shall we? We will lose the current cold northerly flow to a milder westerly flow as wet and windy weather spreads in from the Atlantic. Daytime temperatures will remain a little below average, but the nights will be significantly milder. This evening, many inland areas will be dry and clear with a widespread frost settling in early and the risk of some icy stretches on untreated roads and pavements, so take care. Showers going to continue along North Sea coasts. That's all from the UK tonight. We'll be back on Monday night at 8 o'clock. Up next, It's the World with Yalda Hakim. We'll see you next week.